Hello and welcome to this technical tutorial video about OpenAPI. OpenAPI is a specification that describes RESTful APIs. It's a language-agnostic tool that allows developers to describe their API's functionality in a standard way. With OpenAPI, developers can create machine-readable documentation for their API, which can be used to generate interactive documentation, client SDK, and server stubs automatically. OpenAPI was originally known as Swagger and it was created by Tony Tim in 2011. Tony started working on Swagger while he was at Reverb Technologies, where he realized the need for a better way to document APIs. He wanted to create a tool that would allow developers to describe their API's functionality in a standardized way, regardless of the programming language or framework being used. The main problem that OpenAPI solves is the lack of consistency in API documentation. In the past, documentation varied greatly between different APIs, making it difficult for developers to understand how to use them. With OpenAPI, developers can create standardized documentation that is easy to understand, which makes it easier for other developers to use their API. To proceed with OpenAPI, there are a few prerequisites you should know. Firstly, you should have a basic understanding of RESTful APIs and HTTP. You should also have some knowledge of JSON or YAML, which are the two formats used to describe OpenAPI specification. Additionally, you should have some experience with a programming language, as you will need to write code to implement your API. OpenAPI can run on any platform that supports RESTful APIs. Now, after a brief explanation about OpenAPI, let's move on to the example. This will help us better understand how to implement and use it. As I mentioned earlier, you should be familiar with programming languages. Here is the API, a simple shopping cart API, written in Java. But it doesn't matter which language it's written in. It could be Python, Django, .NET, etc. You only need to implement the OpenAPI framework for this API. And this API is currently working, and when it is running, it will have a port and a Swagger UI. And I opened the URL for the Swagger UI, but the URL may differ depending on the project and the path. This is the Swagger UI, where you can see the API endpoints. There is a link to version 3 of the API documents. I will open this in a new tab. This is the structure of API, which is provided by OpenAPI Swagger. I will copy this and then open the terminal. I will create a folder named OpenAPI Generators on desktop. And then I will create a file called schema.json. Paste the copied content into it. I will format it using the VS Code shortcut and save it. This is the structure of OP provided by OpenAPI. Now let's open the browser again and for OpenAPI. The API generator CLI can be installed using Node.js, or you can use the jar file directly from the Maven website. You can pick the version you want and download the jar file to generate files using the Java environment. However, OpenAPI encourages using npm, and we will use npm to install it. Let's reopen the terminal. Navigate to the OpenAPI generator path, and we will use the command to install it that locally without the G flag, which would install it globally. And also I forgot to mention, if you don't have the Node.js environment, you can download it from the Node.js website. Select the appropriate version of your operating system, whether it's macOS or Windows. You can also install it for Linux by typing Node.js for Linux in the search bar, and you can find how to install it. Now that we have installed the OpenAPI tools, let's go to the package GitHub page where you can find the documentation to generate and export API as library. Since I will export the TypeScript, I need to install TypeScript as well. Let's install TypeScript using command npm install TypeScript. And we also need tsconfig file. I created tsconfig file before, so I will copy it. And don't worry, I will show what's inside in the next minutes. Now let's generate our library. Since we are using TypeScript, we'll also use TypeScript access generator. As generator, you can pick the appropriate generator for your purpose. Let's go to the OpenAPI website and let's see what languages are available. There are many client and server generators in OpenAPI. In the terminal, we need to specify the output file and the generator name. I'll use the TypeScript access generator and specify the output file as new generated API. I'll also provide an npm name as API. This will generate the library for us. It will first download the OpenAPI generator CLI and then use the generator to generate the file. If everything goes smoothly, we should see the generated files in the specified output folder. Let's move on to the next task. In order to see the documentation of the generated API, we will use another npm package called typedoc. This package will allow us to view the documentation items for this library. To install typedoc, we will run npm install typedoc in our terminal. Note that there is a crucial point to remember. You need to specify the index.ts of new generated API as entry point in the config file. To use typedoc, run npx typedoc -out, and we will tell typedoc where to output, and we will choose the new generated API. We will put it in the new generated API so that they will be in the same place. Once you run the command, it will generate the docs file. Now, let's open new generated API file in VS Code. This is where we will see the generated documentation. open index.html in Go Live. This will display the documentation for our API. We can see what the endpoints are, what the interfaces are, and what the methods are. For example, there is a cart DTO, which has properties such as coupon, final value, item, and total price. We can see what's inside the coupon and what's inside the item. We can also see the methods. For example, we can try the cart controller. This API has methods such as add item to carts and apply coupon to carts, etc. The add items to carts methods takes cart ID, product ID, and quantity. We can see all of these things, which help us to understand what's inside the API. We can use this library by publishing it into npm registry, and since it was exported in TypeScript, we can install it as an npm package in another front-end project like React.js and use this library as a reference for a backend and calling API request using this library. To do this, we can publish the library to GitHub or GitLab. I already published it on GitLab. The structure is same, I just published it. It's available here. This is not recommended since it's public, but it doesn't matter since it's just an example. Ideally, it should be private. Let's open the terminal and move to the documents file. This is the front end of the shopping cart. Let's go to the package.json. There's a package called shopping cart API. It can be named whatever you want. Now, let's install the package using the npm install. Since I already installed it, it won't install again, but this is the standard way to install a package. Since this is a public repository, we are not providing a private key here. However, if you're using a private repository, you should include the private key to install the package. And always use private repositories. This is an example, so we are not using private repository. To use this library, we simply import it. As you can see, we're importing from shopping cart API. You can name it whatever you want, but the name must match name in the package.json. In the documentation, we have the cart controller API, the coupon controller API, product controller API, and more. We import them and initialize the cart controller API, coupon controller API, and other references. We can call the methods from these references. For example, we use item to add cart method from the cart controller API. Using OpenAPI helps us to synchronize and document the API. We can use the OpenAPI to document the API in the backend and frontend. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the thumbs up button.